Is it on? I don't hear you. It's my mouth just burns constantly. So I don't need something that I should. Now I can take a little bit of heat. Turn it up. You go to therapist. Okay, we're going to get started with the next class. This is my good friend Rebecca Wilson, who has been sick and just moved this past week. And didn't your daughter just have surgery? And her daughter had surgery, and she's still here teaching. So big thank you to Rebecca.
Right on.
She has been like canning her whole life. She can just tell you all that. But she is like my hero with canning. Anytime I have questions, I call her. And she made me want to learn how to can, or know how to can, and realize that I could do it, that it's really easy. And so she will answer any questions you have. And just so you know, there's somebody here who really is paranoid about bees and what's a disease?
Botulism.
And botulism. So I told her you knew all about that. So
Good.
okay, so she's gonna get started. Oh wait, are you taping?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you're on.
Okay, because I'm moving and I have a cold, I'm a little scatterbrained right now, so I'm going to try and cover everything, but if I skip something or I don't cover it well enough, just let me know. Raise your hand and I'll answer questions. I'm going to start with the basic water bath canning and move down. I know everybody's curious about the pressure canning, so I'll do that last because that generates the most questions. Water bath canning has been around for a very long time, and it works on the premise of filling a pot full of water. You put the jars in your little carrier, and it goes straight down in. They're submerged under water. The water is boiling. It's very hot. It puts a small amount of pressure because usually you have this much water on top of the jars, usually about an inch in these kind of water canners. The jars have to be completely submerged. They get very hot inside. All the food inside the jars and the liquids heats up. It creates a vacuum inside which sucks the lid down. It also forces excess air out at the same time, and that's how canning is done. It doesn't necessarily bring it up to a sterilization point. That's where the pressure canner comes in because it has a higher temperature than a water bath canner can reach. Water bath canners they used to use for meats, beans, vegetables, fruits, everything because they did not have a pressure canner. But you could get botulism more easily with a water bath canner, and you still can because it does not come up to a high enough temperature. The middle of the jar, the inside section of the jar sometimes does not get hot enough to kill off all the bacteria in our natural foods. So fruits are very good to can still in the water bath canner, jellies, things like that, but you're not going to want to do meats or beans or a lot of the vegetables that are out there. You need very high acidic fruits or some vegetables. Tomatoes, they kind of go back and forth on. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. It kind of depends. Also, the canning times are very different. If you were to can beans or meat in this the old-fashioned way, you could be canning for 4 or 5 hours in one. This would be going 4 or 5 hours. You would constantly be adding water to keep the water up. In the pressure canners, you're canning anywhere from 75 to 90 minutes. So the processing time is a lot less. Your fuel is a lot less. It's more inexpensive to use a pressure canner. You can also double stack if you get a tall pressure canner versus one layer in here. The water bath canner, this is actually an old one. It's an antique compared to the newer ones. This one's a little bit thicker and it's a little bit taller than the others. One of the problems with the water bath canners is that, and you need to have towels handy because as it starts to boil, which is what you want, the steam builds up and pretty soon, because the jars are up to here and you only have an inch and a half of space on top of it, it bubbles over a lot. So you end up with a lot of water around it if you're not careful. And you have to watch your temperature on the heat too. You don't want it bubbling so much that you're going to lose a lot of water and constantly have to replace that during the processing time. Okay, the steam canner. This was really popular for a long time. when I was learning how to can from like the 1970s through the late 1980s.
Rebecca, can you hold it up so they can see it?
Okay. This is actually the bottom of the steam canner. It's tarnished because acidic food got in here. You fill this up, as you can see the water line. I don't know if you can all see the water line in there. You fill it up with water about that high. You put these on, put this inside. You sit your jars on top of it. Then the lid goes on. And as the steam starts to generate inside, because there's no way for it to come out except two little holes here, it starts to heat up the food that you just put on the rack. Now the food is not sitting in water, so the only way it gets heated is through the steam that's generated in here. Once the steam comes out both ends, there's two holes here that start shooting out. That's when you start processing. Your time is being processed. Again, it's very similar to the Waterbath canners as far as time. The problem that I've had with this is that a lot of times I would open up my fruit that I would can this way, and the middle, right down the middle of the jar, it wasn't cooked. So I don't use the steam canner anymore. Even the pint jars I had trouble with. Also, I had more trouble with sealing, the jar sealing compared to this one. This one gets it hotter, in my opinion, than the steam canner. This is a lot easier. It's a lot, you can use this as a pan or a pot. You can use this as a pan or a pot, so it's more versatile. It's made out of aluminum, whereas this is a little bit heavier and this can chip. There's pros and cons, but for me and my family, I don't think this gets hot enough for my safety.
Well, and if you go on to the canning, national canning websites, they don't even list that as a possibility because it's not safe.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do anything other than very high acid fruits. Now what I do with this, when I'm doing a lot of jelly or jam, which is already processed because it's been boiling, it's getting thick, you put it into the clean jars, and you want a really good seal on it, you can put it in here, and you can process it this way so that you get a good seal. But that's pretty much all I use it for now. I don't use it for anything else. But I bring it so I can show you. This one is also a Waterbath Canner. It's made by the Amish. You can get it through Lehman's Hardware, which I don't think they're on. Yeah, they are online.
Yeah, they are online.
This is, it holds 24 quarts. You can put a lot more pints in. I can't remember how many. It's soldered with silver, so it's food safe. You can actually use this as a large pot if you're going to have a large church gathering or family gathering and you want soup, or you want to boil corn on the cob or something like that in here. You can do that as well. It has a very large wrap that goes in the bottom. It's not very high. You're going to fill this up almost about halfway with water. I won't put it in, it's too noisy. You're going to fill it about halfway with water because as you start putting the jars in, the water level rises. One of the really nice things about this versus this kind is you end up with much more water on top of your jars, whereas here you get, I've had 1/2 inch up to 1.5 inches of water over my jars. Here you can have anywhere from 4 to 6 inches on top of your jars. So your jars, when they come out, are very, very hot. They're thoroughly cooked. The seals are beautiful. I've never had a problem with seals not sealing well through here, unless I didn't clean off the rims well enough and there was a chunk of food there that broke the seal. But otherwise, I've never had a problem with this. This one, about 10 years ago, was $99. This one also is very large. You can put it over 2 burners, so you're processing faster. It's heating faster. Whereas if I had 2 of these, I'm going to be constantly refilling with water and fiddling and adjusting the temperature. This thing, you only have to put it on the 2 burners and let it go because there's so much water in there, it's just going to keep processing. When I'm doing a lot of fruits and jellies during the summer, this is what I use. And one good solid day of processing food and it's all done. You can go through this 24 at a time. It's very quick. Okay. Some of the tools used in canning, they come in a little package now, which is really nice. I found mine, by the way. It was in my canner. She brought hers because I couldn't find mine. I couldn't move. And again, before I get to that one, I'm going to go over some basic canning safety, just because a lot of people use the water bath. Okay, what should we start with? Your funnel is going to go into your jar, and then you can put your food in, and it helps prevent spillage and getting your jar sticky. This is your lid lifter. It has a little magnet on the end. You can hear it. It lifts the jar lids out of the hot boiling water that you're letting them soak in. So you don't have to stick your fingers in. And you can not only pick it up, you can also put it directly on, let go, and screw your lid on. So it's very easy. This little funny looking device, you actually put inside the jar to get the air bubbles out. You don't want to put metal inside your jars. A lot of people like to put knives or forks or spoons in there to move the food away from the side of the jar so you can get all the bubbles to come up to the top. You want as many bubbles out as possible because that's where your botulism is going to want to start growing. So it slides down in here. This will not scratch your jar because it's made out of plastic. Metal will. So table knives, teaspoons, the upside end of a fork, whatever you want to use can scratch your jars. And the result of that is under pressure or under a lot of heat. Any of these methods, when you bring it out of the water, it can explode. So you don't want to do that, and you'll waste all your food, and you'll have a big mess to clean up. The other tool that comes with this set is your jar lifter. It's very difficult to get jars out of hot boiling water without something like this. I have used tongs before, but it's very difficult. This you just put over the jar and you lift it up. It's very simple. You can do anything with it. It has a rubberized bottom, so it grasps the jar very strongly and it doesn't slip at all. When your processing time is up and you're lifting your jars out of the water, you want to lift them straight up and hold them there like this, because as the cold air hits the jar, if there's any defect in the jar that's going to cause it to break or explode, you want it to happen over here. You don't want it to happen here, and you don't want to have it over here or anywhere near you. You want it directly over here. I have broken jars before. It's just something that happens. Every single jar you take out, you hold up for like 20, 30 seconds just to see what's going to happen. You won't get hurt. You can use mayonnaise jars in Waterbath canners. You can reuse spaghetti jars, mayonnaise jars, whatever jars will fit with the rings and the lids you can reuse, but you cannot use them in the pressure canner. The pressure canner puts too much pressure on the jars, and they're not made for that kind of pressure. They're made more for a water bath heat. So you can reuse your mayonnaise jars if you want to. I've done that for years too, but it's always fruit and jelly. Let's see. Like I said, I'm a little scattered. Yeah.
The other advantage of the little paddle you had, it has notches in it for inches, and different foods will expand in different ways, and your recipe will usually tell you how much space to leave at the top.
Can you guys see the notches he's talking about? I think they're 1/4 inch notches, right? So if you have, let's say, beans, which are going to expand more, you're going to want to leave more space in the jar, and you can measure it this way.
Repeat what he said, because the people in the back probably didn't hear. Or what that is.
Oh, this is a measurement tool, the bottom part. Let's say this is the top layer of your food in your jar, and you're going to be putting liquid in. You can sit this down inside the food, have it touch the food, and how high you want.
How much space you want.
How much space you want, you're going to use this tool. It can fit on the side, so here you can see how much liquid you want. Or if you only want a little bit, if you want a lot. Okay, I usually eyeball it. It's easier. Okay, any questions on this? I'm not going to go over the whole basic processing, should I? How to do all of it? Okay. We don't have an empty jar. All right. Any food that you're going to process, you're going to prepare. in some way. If it's fruit, you're going to wash it, possibly cut it, peel it, chop it up, however you want to do it. Applesauce, you're going to pre-cook it. If you're canning meat for the pressure canner or beans, you're going to again process it before you put it in the jars. Once you have your food ready and it's inside the jars and you use the funnel to put the food in, you're going to take a damp paper towel and just wipe the rim off, because you don't want anything on this top rim of the glass jar. If you have anything on here and you put your rubber seal on, it can cause a little break in the seal and air and bacteria can get in. And when you take it out, you'll notice too, sometimes they just start sealing. It's because maybe there's a tiny piece of meat or there's a tiny piece of fruit that's sitting on there breaking the seal. Once you have your food, let's say this is fruit, we're going to process it in the Waterbath Canner. There's two methods. There's the hot pack method and there's the cold pack method. The hot pack method is, let's say peaches. You've peeled them, you've sliced them up, you have them in a pot and you have them cooking, so they're getting a little bit softer. You have liquid in there. It could be a syrup, a light syrup, a heavy syrup, medium syrup. You don't want to use just plain water, because the water will actually suck the juice, the sugar out of the fruit into the water and make the fruit taste bad. So you always want to have at least a light syrup, a light sugary syrup. Once you decide which method you want to go with, you can do the hot pack method, where you pre-cook your peaches in the hot syrup. You pack them in here. You fill up the jar with the syrup to however high, usually about half an inch to an inch. You're going to take care of the lid. You're going to clean it off. You're going to put the lid on. You're going to screw down the lid, the band, the round ring, as tightly as you can. And then it's ready to go into the Waterbath Canner. You don't want to put this one in and then start on another one and put that one in, because the first one's already cooking. So you want to have all of yours ready and then put them in all at the same time, one after the other. If you're using the cold pack method, you can slice up your peaches or whatever it's going to be, put them in your jar, fill that up with hot syrup that you have on the stove. Light syrup, I believe, is 1 cup sugar and 3 cups water. Medium syrup is 2 cups sugar and 3 cups water. And heavy syrup is 3 and 3. And you can have that boiling on your stove. You just ladle it in to as high as you want it. Again, clean off the rim, put the band on, or the lid and then the band on, and you're ready to go. The difference between the two, hot pack method, it has a tendency to soften the fruits a little bit more, secure the color. It can also kill off some bacteria, not a lot, but some, and it can improve the flavor. Cold pack method is faster, obviously, because you're not doing as much processing, and if you have a lot of fruit to process, it's an easy way to do it. It turns out fine as well. I think the flavor is better with hot pack for most fruits than it is for the cold pack method. You can do the hot pack and cold pack method with any kind of food that you're going to process. Meats, beans, salsa, anything that you're going to can, you can do it either way. It's just a personal preference. Like hamburger, if you're going to cook, or if you're going to process the hamburger, you can put it in. You can just take a chunk of it and stick it in here raw, and you can can it. It's going to come out like a chunk, like perfectly formed inside here. I believe you probably pre-cooked this, right?
I did, because I didn't want it to be a loaf.
Right, and as you can see, it jiggles, it's broken apart, it has liquid in between it. One of the good things about doing a hot pack method with meat is you get color because the meat is browned. You get more flavor because it's browned and you've probably added spices to it and the whole thing is cooked up. And it also separates itself. Whereas this one here was probably a cold pack method, where she took raw chicken and stuck it in the jar and cooked it, and as you can see, it's one big chunk that now you have to separate, break apart. So it really depends on what you're going to want to use it for. and what your own preferences are. When you start to can, you have to think about what you like. What's going to be the easiest if you have a lot of chicken or beef, or something's on sale and you want to can it all at once. That plays into it. With ground beef, you can also make meatloaf. Make up your meatloaf recipe, shove it in here, and you end up with a little round meatloaf that comes out. You can make meatballs. I've done meatballs before. You can either fill it up with liquid or you can leave it dry. Either is fine. Beans, same thing. It really depends on what you want to use it for. Did I miss anything? My brain is like...
When you do the meatloaf, you just make it up like you normally would, and just
Your
pull
favorite
off enough
recipe.
to pull in, and it just forms to the inside of the jar.
And
Right.
cooks.
And cooks.
And cooks.
You'll notice that it shrinks a little bit like it would in the pan.
I was just going to
And
ask.
you'll have natural juices that come around, including fat.
Right.
If there's a little bit of white after it's all cooled off, that's normal too. You don't
Yeah.
have to worry about it. You can pop off the lid and stick it in the oven and heat it up in there. You don't even have to dirty another dish. You can also slice it and make sandwiches. If you use hamburger buns, you can slice it and put it on a hamburger bun and have a meatloaf sandwich. There's a lot of different things that you can do. The one problem is if you're going to, this is easy. This is a wide mouth jar. It's very wide. This is a regular jar. When you're doing something like meatloaf, you're
Wide
going to
mouth,
want a
yeah.
wide mouth so it slides right out. Otherwise, you're going to have to be reaching in here with a fork and breaking it apart to get it out. So that's something to consider as well. The quart-sized jars also come in wide mouth and regular. This is a wide mouth, although there is a little rim here. So some jars are a little bit, they
There's a
don't have the
regular one
rim.
underneath the paper right over here with the tomato. No,
This one?
quart one.
Okay, this one?
No, quart. The
Quart.
tomatoes.
There it is. You can see how it would be very hard to get a meatloaf out of this because it tapers so much. Okay. Meatballs are really easy, and you can even put sauce in them. You can take whole sausages, stick them in, either pre-cooked or raw. Stick them in whether it's breakfast, Italian, whatever you like, stick them in there. I didn't bring mine to show. And you can add sauce, you can leave them without. And you have an instant meal, you just open it up and you've got food to eat. So when there's really good sales, it's great. One time when we were living in Little Rock, our freezer died. We raised our own meat, so our freezer was packed with pork, beef, and chicken. And we couldn't afford to get a new freezer, so I spent 4 days doing nothing but canning meat. And I was able to can almost everything. What I couldn't can, I cooked, and I took over to my mother-in-law's and she froze for me. But that was really handy because in an emergency, if the power goes out, you have all this meat, what are you going to do with it? You can't cook it all, because once you cook it all, you still have to refrigerate it. You can dehydrate it, you can dry it and make jerky. That would be my #1 choice. Or you can pressure can it and save it that way.
How long can you keep meat canned?
They say 1 year, but we've eaten it at 3 to 5 years and it's still perfectly fine. As long as you keep it out of sunlight and in a cool spot, it doesn't seem to deteriorate in flavor or the look of it. If it's left out with any kind of light or the heat is over 80, I've noticed color changes. Another thing you're going to want to do, especially if it's more than a year, is you're going to want to cook it and make sure that it reaches a high enough temperature that any potential botulism in there is killed off. Just because, that's the guidelines now, that's what I'm going to tell you. But for my family, it hasn't been a problem to have it longer than that. I've never...
The stuff that I read about that was that home can jars in glass versus metal will they store indefinitely as long as the seals are not broken on them. And as long as they were processed correctly to begin with. So.
Yeah, my grandmother used to can everything, and they had canned goods down in their basement. And every year she would keep canning, but she would rotate her stuff, of course. And one year the snow got over the top of the roof, and they were stuck for a month or almost 2 months down in their basement. And they lived off of their canned goods.
Right. As long as every canning lid comes with, I don't know if you've all seen them, This side is all flat metal. The inside, if you were to turn it over, is flat metal on the inside, and then you have a very thin rim of rubber. And that's where the seal takes place. As long as that's okay, the food should be fine. When you go to open your jar, you want to be able to hear a whoosh of air and a popping sound as the lid here pops up and the air gets inside. That shows you that there's a really good vacuum in there. If you don't hear that, then probably the seal was not really good, and over time a little bit of air at a time has gotten in and it's no good anymore. A proper seal, when you put the jars on, actually, did you know this one's no good?
That's not mine.
Okay. A proper seal, when you put the jars on originally to put into whichever canner you're going to use, you're going to hear this. Because the suction, the vacuum inside has not sucked the lid down. That's what creates that there's air in there. After you have processed it, you shouldn't hear anything. And you will also notice this has a little tiny bulge out. It's curved. I can't remember if it's concave or... This one is almost barely sucked under, but it's flat. So you can see it and you can hear it. You know if the seal is good. Something like this I wouldn't eat because corn, especially, corn and green beans are really bad with botulism, and this one is just really not a good food.
Yeah, so don't eat that. That was a good example of what not to eat.
Yeah.
Even though heat will kill the botulinum bacteria, it will not destroy the toxin it makes.
Right.
So if there's any botulism in there, you can cook it all day after it comes out, it will still kill you.
Well, yes and no. I've actually had to do a college paper on that, and according to national guidelines, as long as you cook it, and this has a lot of liquid in it, as long as you cook it in an open pot without a lid, the spores are supposed to be able to come out through the steam. That's just
yes, but
what I heard.
You do not destroy the toxin it's made sitting in there all that time.
Okay.
But you can destroy the toxin through a boiling process, and you can get that off the canning website.
Yeah, I'm not going to go there.
Just heating it up will not, maybe boiling it for a while, but
You're supposed to boil it in an open pot with enough liquid to create steam for 15 minutes, and then it's supposed
when you
to
originally
be...
can it, I'm saying
No.
that
No.
after,
Right now,
Afterwards.
this you should...
I wouldn't want to take
I
it.
wouldn't either, but that's the guidelines, is it should be safe. I'm not here to say yes or no, that's just what the guidelines show. Okay.
And always, you know, like her corn, I did a bunch of meat one time and I started smelling something in the room that it's in. I'm like, what? And it was all sealed when I first did it. It all passed my little test. But sometimes it doesn't, you know, the seals break when you're moving them around. So always recheck them before you're going to use them.
Or if you have them in an area like up against a wall where it's getting hot on one side, the front ones are fine, the back one might be getting heated up over time during the summer. We had that in our garage. Okay, let's move on to pressure canning. Okay.
I'd like to say, if in doubt, throw it out.
Yeah.
If one jar of stuff isn't gonna break it, but you can
No.
sure do it the other way. You get a can to throw them both in the trash, it doesn't go.
Right. Okay, the pressure canner, I'll explain how the system works first.
Can you explain the difference in the two kinds of pressure canners too? The gauge versus the
Like the regular home canner.
the weighted versus the not weighted?
Oh, okay. Okay. This is the inside of the pressure canner. It's very deep. You can get some that are half this high. This one holds 2 layers of quart jars. You can also get one that holds 1 layer. You can also get 3 layers of pints in here as well, so you can pressure can a lot of food all at once. The racks go in the bottom. One goes for each layer, and they come with 2. You're going to fill this up about here. They want 2 inches. I like to fill it up a little bit more because I have boiled mine dry before the processing was done. So I always have a little bit of extra. Then you put your jars inside. If you need another rack, you can put that one in, put more jars in. And you make sure that there's plenty of water in there. You can do hot or cold pack method in here. You have a little arrow here, so you have to align it perfectly.
It's over here,
It's on this side.
in the front.
Okay.
Right there.
There's a little notch here and there's a little arrow here, and the two of them have to match up. Now this one, the All-American Pressure Canner, one of the things that's different between the two canners is this one does not have a rubber seal. There's no rubber here that has to be replaced. This is metal to metal seal. The rubber ones you have to replace every 2 to 5 years depending on how often you use them.
Or if they've been sitting in heat.
If they've been sitting in heat, because they crack, they get worn out, they need to be replaced. This one has an emergency escape valve, so if the pressure gets too high inside, this little button here pops out and the steam just starts pouring out. When I was growing up, my mother had me convinced that pressure canners were the most horrific thing you could ever imagine. She actually lived through one exploding in the kitchen and embedding itself in the ceiling. So I was very afraid of using these for the longest time until I found this one and I read up on it. And the first time I used it, I was hiding around the kitchen door and like peeking in and checking everything because I really was afraid of them. The thing that they didn't have back then was the emergency release valve. I think the metal was like getting too much metal. Before, when they had the old-fashioned ones, they didn't have this. So when the pressure got too high, the only thing that could happen would be that the lid would explode off of the pressure canner. This revolutionized pressure canning because as soon as it gets too hot, this pops off. You have a gauge here, and the black is where it starts to get dangerous. And at any point in the black area, the emergency valve is going to shoot off. It also lets you know if your canner is also getting up to the high enough temperature. This is one safety. This little thing is the other, it's the weighted.
And that's what the other canners don't have, is the weight.
So what you're going to do after your jars are in, your water's in, you're going to line these up, and then you're going to start screwing these down opposite. If you don't do it opposite, you're going to have it cattywampus.
She didn't just tell you what you did, but when she puts the lid down, she puts it down and there's little hooks that hook under the things, and you have to twist it a little bit, and that's what lines up your thing, and you have to make sure that your hooks are all hooked underneath.
There's one here. Where's the other one?
Yes, right there.
Yeah, right in front there.
This one?
No, the other one. The first one you took. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So you should be able to see the hook when this is out of the way. And these just screw on. Now that I have it screwed on, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tighten any that feel loose because I don't want it coming off. Okay. Now you're going to turn on your heat. And as the heat starts to get that water boiling, steam is going to start coming around, swirling around all over the inside and outside, all around the jars. This is what causes the temperature to rise and the pressure to increase. Because once it's all swirling around, little spurts of steam are going to start coming out of here. And so you know it's starting to take all the air, push it up to the top, and the air is coming out with little spurts of steam pushing it out. That's what you want to see. Once it gets to be one solid stream of steam coming up here, it's ready to start the processing. You have a little weighted gauge. It's 5, if I put it on here, it's 5 pounds. This one is 10 pounds, this one is 15 pounds. The difference is how deep these are. For here, it's 15 pounds because of our elevation. Now, if you're doing fruit, you're going to want to do 10 because it's going to turn it into mush otherwise. I don't really do fruit in the pressure canner. I've done pineapple. That's pretty much it because once the temperature has gotten up to processing, it's processed over 5 to 10 minutes. Then it has to cool completely off before you can take the lid off. All that time it's cooling off, it's still cooking. So if you have very soft, overripe fruit, you're not going to want to use a pressure canner. Okay, once you put this on, you'll notice that it starts to creak a little bit because the pressure is starting to build up. There's nowhere for the steam to go. There's nowhere for the pressure to go. It starts to lift the lid up just the tiniest bit, and you hear cracking and creaking, and it makes you nervous and everything, but it's fine. Then this, you'll notice, will start to jiggle. Just kind of like this.
Yeah.
And little bits of steam will come out. Every time it jiggles, it's letting the steam out. That's how it pressurizes the inside of the chamber. When this jiggles, tiny bit of steam comes out. Sometimes little bits of water come out. And that's what you want to hear. You want to hear it anywhere from 1 to 6, 7 times a minute. You want to just hear that, and then you know the temperature is okay. If it's a constant jiggle, and this one's not working out, let's try this one. If it's a constant jiggle like this, and it's never ending, one, your temperature underneath is too high. It's causing so much steam and pressure in here that there's no break in between. You're going to lose a lot of moisture through here, so your water level is going to go down and you can burn your canner dry. The other thing is that the temperature can get too high too quickly that way. And you don't want to overcook it, and you don't want to break your jars. So if it's just a little bit, that's fine. If it's constant, you want to turn your temperature down just a notch, and then wait and see what happens. And if it's still too much, just another little notch until you get it perfect. And then once it's starting like this, and you have it perfect, you're going to start the timing of the processing time. For quart jars, it's usually 90 minutes for meats and beans. For pint jars, it's usually 75, although if you're doing fish or mushrooms or some of the other very low acid foods, it could be a lot longer.
And smelly. Fish is really smelly.
Very smelly. When you buy this, you end up with this, which is a wonderful how-to guide, and it has all the timetables in here. It has recipes. It tells you, frog legs, oysters, clams, everything you can think of is in here. And that way you can do it safely. So this is just, okay.
So when you put it in, the water doesn't cover the jars. The water's just at the bottom.
Right. Like I said, I usually put about 4 inches in. If it's a quart jar, by the time I have the whole bottom filled up, it's usually up to about here. Which is fine, because it's the temperature and the pressure that's going to process your food. It doesn't have to be steam. By the time I'm done processing, the water is usually down to here. That's about how much you lose, about this much. That's why I always put in extra water, because I don't want to burn it dry.
What do you use the gauge for?
As once you put this on, the temperature and the pressure start to rise. You'll notice here, you see the pressure inside actually rising in little increments. You can tell when it gets to be about what you're looking for.
How hot does it get before it gets into the black?
250 degrees.
That's all, huh?
Well, it goes a little bit higher. I'm trying to think here. 200. I'm trying to see here.
Got my glasses.
I don't have my glasses either. It looks like 227. I don't know. Where does it get to the black? He's got glasses.
Yeah, the black is 260, and the peak is 275.
Okay.
So
You want-
260 is dangerous then?
It's just getting into the danger zone. I've never had one of these pop off, and I've gotten right in the middle of the black when I started to burn my canner dry. I noticed immediately it stopped hissing, it stopped spitting, this wasn't bouncing anymore, this was creaking more, and I came running over to the stove, and it was half in the black, and this still hadn't popped off yet.
Are there any canners that will get the temperature up to 300 degrees?
Not that I know of, unless they're like factory,
Okay.
ones that you would find in the factory. You might be able to adapt one, I'm not sure. The problem is the pressure here. The metal is so thick, it only goes up to a certain temperature. You would have to get thicker metal.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, I was watching BYU TV on my computer, and this is what they were talking about. The lady said this is the best way to can, but hers got up to a higher temperature, and it was heavier metal. And a physician friend of mine says, if you have any allergies, anybody in the family has allergies, you have to get it up to 300 degrees to change the protein in the food so that you don't have an allergic reaction.
I never heard of that. I would be afraid to get it over 250 though, because you're going to lose nutrients.
You'd have to have another kind of canner that would go up that high.
Right, but you would also lose nutrients. the vitamins, different things that you would want to find and have in your food. And I'm not sure if having a higher pressure and temperature would actually change the molecular structure.
Well, it just changes the structure of the protein so that people who have allergies can eat it and not react to it.
So what I want to know is, what did you do when you burned it dry?
That was one of the few times that I actually took this off while it was still on the stove. I didn't open this. I took this off to get it down as cool as I could, and then all I could do was sit there and wait for it to come down to normal.
Did you turn the burners off?
Yeah, you turn the burner off immediately. I didn't want to move it again because it was overheated, and you have all those glass jars in there, and it's very heavy. I didn't want to lift it up and put it on a cooler burner, so I just had to let it cool down naturally. I also didn't put any fans on it because I didn't want it to crack. Again, it's too hot. I don't want to do anything that's going to stimulate the metal cracking. So I just let it go. And it took at least 30 minutes for it to get completely cooled off to where I could crack it open. And then it smelled.
Because it was in the jar.
It was burned. Everything on the bottom was burned.
You might explain the difference between a pressure cooker and a pressure canner, because some people, if they don't know the difference, are going to
That's
get in
true.
trouble.
A pressure cooker this can also be used as a pressure cooker too. You can put a whole turkey, a whole ham, you can fill it up halfway with beans, you can do a lot of things. A pressure cooker though is used for cooking meats. It is not used for pressure canning. Canning is a little bit different. Because of the jars involved, you don't want to have them in something that's not going to, well the pressure cooker itself is thinner metal. It doesn't necessarily reach the same temperature, so it's not going to be quite as safe. And the jars themselves may end up getting overheated on one side and not cooking as smoothly on the other, because it's not. After the class, come up and feel the metal and you'll see what I'm talking about. This evenly heats it perfectly all the way around, whereas a pressure cooker wouldn't. A pressure cooker also doesn't have the weight or the gauge. Some of them have a little flip-top tab that you can put up, and it releases steam for a certain pressure, but that's pretty much it. And the old ones, like I said, they would only go by the gauge, and you would constantly have to watch
Yeah,
it.
can you tell them the difference between the weighted ones, and the not weighted ones? The ones with just the gauge? Because I used one with just the gauge the second time I canned, and that is a nightmare.
It is. Because you have to constantly watch the gauge and adjust the temperature. There's no way to get any of the extra pressure out, whereas this you can. In an emergency too, you can just pull it straight off. Steam is going to come straight out, so there's a way to get extra heat and pressure out of there. But constantly watching the clock, watching the gauge, watching the heat, doing all of that it's a nightmare. That's why,
The thing that's different with the weighted one is the weight keeps it at a constant 15 pounds pressure.
Because it jiggles.
The jiggling is letting the steam off, which keeps it at that pressure. The other one doesn't have that, and so if your pressure drops, if it's supposed to process at 15 pounds and it drops to 13, you have to start your whole timing over. And so you have to be watching it constantly to make sure that it's staying where it's supposed to be and it doesn't drop down. So I didn't like that at all. And this, you can just listen to the jiggle. You can be, mine's in the kitchen. I sit in the family room. I can hear it jiggling. And I know, it's jiggling too much. I need to turn it down. Or, I didn't hear it jiggle very much. I'm going to go, turn it up. But it never drops down below my pressure. So.
And when I burned it dry and it stopped jiggling completely, it took me about 2 or 3 minutes to realize, wait a second. And I still had time to get in and turn it down before it went to the highest, and I lost the plug. The plugs can be easily replaced too.
The other thing is with the other ones, you are really supposed to recalibrate your gauges every year when you use your things. And with these, you don't have to, and you don't have to replace the gaskets.
And my gauge is off by 4.
Oh.
My gauge is off by 4.
Where can you get one of those?
I bought this one on Amazon.com about 3 or 4 years ago. I think at that point it was $239. You can get all different sizes. This is the second to the largest size.
Yeah, make sure it's going to fit on your stove too. You need to measure because the bigger ones like hers, If you have a microwave over top or something, it usually won't fit with it when you can do the double stack one. I have the next size down because mine, I can do quarts and pints, I can't do 2 quarts.
Right. Because even though it may fit, if you slid this under, you have to take the lid on and off, and that gives you a couple more inches you need.
Emergency Essentials has the smaller one for $229, and this was $269.
I know the price went up. I had one prior to this that we actually, paint got spilled inside and I could never get it out, so that one was ruined. And that one was only $99, that was years ago, so I was kind of surprised at how the prices jumped.
Can't you have it, even sandblasted out?
I wouldn't
And
trust
use
it because I wouldn't want to damage the inside and cause a crack or anything that could lead to a further crack. If you ever drop these, you have to send them back to the company so they can pressurize it and make sure that there's no, tiny crack you can't see.
I have a question. Now, when you can, do you can on a gas stove or electric stove?
I've done both.
Because I know even when I do the cooking, it takes the electric a long time to cool down. And I've got one of those smooth tops that I'll never do again, ever.
We're moving, so this last house we were in, the one we're moving out of, I destroyed our stove by using this on it because it had the coils. And it got so hot, it melted the coils.
Wow.
So I prefer gas, definitely.
You can control the temperature better with gas.
Right. And what holds up the pots is thicker. Instead of that little ring of the element that heats up, oh my gosh, that was just like...
You're also not supposed to use the smooth top ones because it can crack your glass.
It's heavy and the heat. Any kind of glass, when it's put under too much heat and weight, can crack.
Presto puts out one type of canner now that doesn't have a pressure gauge on it, it's strictly the weight.
I think they're probably going to go to that. Yeah, because too many people like visuals.
Yeah.
So they won't go with the gauge. But
If they don't check them, you don't know. And if they're off over 2 pounds, they tell you.
the only time that the weight doesn't work is if this little steam vent gets plugged. If you're cooking beans, if it gets plugged, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long does it generally take to cool down?
It kind of depends on what you have in there. If I have fruits, some vegetables, it's faster than meats and beans because meats and beans are denser. Generally, if I have a whole canner full of beans, it's going to take 30 minutes to cool down to where it gets to 0. I know some women who go ahead and every few minutes, they lift it up and put it back down. If you do this, you're inviting your jars inside to crack because too much pressure is being released and it can cause the jars to crack. Only a few times have I actually taken it off and just in an emergency. One time my son fell and broke his arm, so I was turn off canner, let this off, and we were out the door. And of course the food inside hadn't been fully processed, but it's going to take at least 30 minutes. I think the last time I did green beans it was only about 20 because they weren't quite as dense. And it also depends on how many jars you have in there. If you have 2 layers, it's going to be a lot more because every one of these jars, because it's a higher temperature inside, come out bubbling and boiling, whereas in a Waterbath Canner, you may not see them bubbling. In this thing, they're going to be bubbling. Sometimes they even ooze out the sides, just because the internal temperature in the jar is so high, which is good. That's what you want to see.
Does that, if the stuff oozes out, that'll ruin the seal though?
Not necessarily because it oozes, if it's just the liquid and it oozes out, it's still going to suck the lid down and squish flat and you still can have a very good seal. If you have little chunks like applesauce coming out or you have ground beef or noodles, something in there that's coming out and it's going to get stuck there, that causes a little bridge for air and bacteria to get through and that's when you have a problem. What you can do is if you have one that you're not sure about, you just wash it off, put it in the fridge, and use it in the next week or 2. Any more questions on that? And I was gonna go over botulism real quick here.
Can you just explain to them what hot pack and what cold pack is?
Okay,
She did.
yeah, I kinda did in the
You did?
beginning.
Okay. Oh, yeah,
With
she
meats
did.
especially, you're going to wanna figure out what you're going to use it for, or what's the fastest method for what time limit you have. We like to pre-cook ours. More flavor, more color. It condenses the meat more. Well, you know, now this was a cold pack too, because it's all stuck together.
Uh-huh. They're all cold packs except for the hamburger.
Okay, all right. And here, look, she's even made soup. There's noodles in here, carrots, onions. When you have something with mixed ingredients, it's got beans. It looks like meat, noodles, onions, carrots. You have all kinds of processing times here. You're going to go with the processing time that is the very longest. Onions are a very long processing time. So maybe if it was just meat or beans, you would have 90 minutes in here. With onions, you may have 110. So you're going to have to process the entire thing 110 minutes instead of just 90. Does that make sense?
Or you could cook the onions and stuff ahead and add it to the other cold
You
stuff.
still have to process it for that whole amount, even if you pre-cook it. Yeah.
Some of the websites say not to put in pasta or rice.
Yeah.
What's the reason for that?
There's two reasons. One, it can expand. Beans do too. Under pressure, it can expand. It can crack your jars. It can pop your seals. The other thing is, oh my gosh, it just went out of my head. That was one.
They get mushy.
They get mushy. That was the other one. They can get overcooked. If you're going to, which I do a lot, if you're going to can soup and you're going to put in orzo or regular rice or some kind of noodle, only cook it halfway. You still want the middle very firm and almost crunchy when you put it into the canning jars. That way it's already absorbed most of the liquid it's going to, so it's not going to expand. And it's already partially cooked, but not fully cooked, so it won't get mushy. When you're doing beans, there's multiple ways of doing it. You can pre-cook them, so they're completely cooked, and then you can can them. When you do it that way, you don't need to leave headspace because they're already fully swollen up, as big as they're going to get, and you can fill up the jar to within an inch of the headspace with liquid, whatever kind you want. You can also partially cook them, so they're cooked maybe half an hour to an hour. The outer skin is soft. It's absorbed some moisture. You're going to fill it about 3/4 full at that point. Fill up the rest with water. You can also put lentils, split peas, different kinds of beans at 1/3 to a half of the jar filled just with hard, dry beans. Fill up the jar with the water. You can put spices, anything you want in there, and seal it and can it that way. We prefer pre-cooking or cooking halfway because it makes the outer shell is softer. It's just like opening a jar or a can from the store, and you can mush it. Whereas the ones that I've cooked where I put them in raw, the outer shell was still kind of almost, not quite like the popcorn kernels, but you could tell there was a difference. And my kids didn't like it, so I don't do it that way.
So when you say or halfway cooked, does that mean you're soaking them and then cooking them halfway before you can them?
You can pre-soak them overnight for 10 to 12 hours, and that will work. Or you can cook them for half an hour to an hour on the stove at a boil, a low simmer, and use that. Again, it's on your timetable if you remember to do it the night before, or if you need to do it fast, you can do it fast.
So if you soak them, you could put them in the bottles at what ratio? A half then?
I'd say between a half and 3/4, depending on the type of bean. Pinto beans expand the most. They have a lot of starch in them, so they expand the most. Split peas or lentils or soy beans, little white beans, the navy beans, those, they don't expand as much, so you can fill it up to 3/4. You can can any kind of soup that you make. If you have leftovers, stick it in the jar, put it on here while you're doing the dishes, and then you have canned soup ready for you. We do that a lot too, make huge batch and can it. Beans are really easy to can, and because of the move, and I couldn't find where my boys put all my jars, normally we would have eaten a jar about like this the other night for dinner. I had to go buy one, and it was $5 for something like this, and I think I probably spent 25 to 50 cents on canning it. It was just incredible, the difference. And you can put anything in it you want, any kind of spice, onions, cilantro, you can mix it with meat, anything you want to do, so that all you have to do is open it up, stick it in whatever recipe you have, and there you go. It's very simple. Let me just go over some temperatures real quick, and then I think I'll be done. Pressure canning brings the internal temperature of the canner and the food inside the jars to 250 degrees. That way it's completely sterilized, basically, inside the jars. There's no bacteria. Waterbath canning brings the internal temperature of food to 190 degrees at the highest point. If you keep it boiling for a good 30 to 45 minutes, you're going to reach 190. So when you put your fruits in there, it's not anywhere near that. That's why it has to be high acid, because it also helps kill off bacteria. Mold and fungus are killed at temperatures between 120 and 140 degrees. Salmonella is killed at 140 to 190 degrees. Staph and botulism, both of which produce deadly toxins in the body, are killed at 240 degrees. This goes up to 250, so you're ensured that it's going to be safe, or safer. Only pressure canning provides a temperature high enough, both in the canner itself and most especially in the food inside the jars, to be considered a safe method of canning for low acid foods. Yep, I think that was it. If you have high acid foods, or you want to put lemon juice or vinegar in them, like you can with tomatoes, then you can do it in the Waterbath Canner. The natural acid in the foods help destroy the mold and yeast when heated in the Waterbath Canner. Okay. Waterbath canners can only kill mold, fungus, and some bacteria, but not staph, botulism, and salmonella. Steam canners have an internal temperature of 120 to 200 degrees, but their processing is much shorter, so I don't trust it. That's a steam canner.
What temperature was the mold and yeast filled at?
Mold and yeast is 120 to 140, and salmonella is 140 to 190, and staph and botulism is at 240. So, any questions? I know that was a lot to go over. No?
You're so good, no questions.
I felt so scatterbrained.
Did a great job.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Rebecca.